Thank you for
Okay,
joining us for another opportunity to meet the winners of the 2021 Ben Franklin Writers Award, sponsored by the National Fire Heritage Center. This is a way that we fulfill our mission to preserve the history of America's fire services by honoring people who have written documents that are telling the story of what's happened in the past so that future generations can benefit from those stories. I'm real pleased today to be interviewing Anton Riecher, the former editor of Industrial Fire World, and David White, who was the owner of Industrial Fire World and started his Industrial Fire World magazine about 1985. Sold it in 2019. So 34 years later, we're excited to celebrate some of the preservation of the stories that they published during that time. Anton was editor for about, 24 years?
24 years.
24 years. Anton, I want to show them just a moment. This is the book that Anton and David published, Disasters Man-Made, that is going to be in the it is already in the National Fire Heritage Center archive, so people can view it through downloads from there, or they can order it through the National Fire Heritage Center bookstore or store that's online. I'll get it straight in a minute. But anyway, let's think for a moment about what it takes to put together a book like this. Tell us a little bit about how you got started writing and how you got from the newspaper role to the fire world role.
How did I get started writing? Well, for about 20 years, I was a newspaper journalist. Worked at daily papers in small cities all across Texas. About 24 years ago, I got the opportunity to apply my feature writing skills to magazine journalism. Made the jump to being editor of Industrial Fire World magazine. The book, Disaster Man-Made, is it republishes 31 of the best articles from my years as editor at the magazine. Some of these incidents are historically famous. Whiting, Indiana in 1955, hydroformer explosion that spread fire through 67 storage tanks. The following year in Sunray, Texas, we had an incident that still ranks only 3 places behind the World Trade Center as the largest loss of lives as far as firefighters are concerned. 1974, Port Neches, Texas, had a tank fire there at a place called Magpetco that Dwight Williams still maintains is the worst storage tank fire he ever had to deal with in his life. Involved a boilover. Overseas incidents such as Milford Haven in 1983, Milford Haven, UK. Also in the UK was the Buncefield disaster. Back in the U.S., 1984, Romeoville, Illinois, 17 people killed when a pressure vessel failed during a fire. And the 2 big incidents that capped off the bad old 80s, Baton Rouge, 16 storage tanks ablaze, and the same year, 1989, Pasadena, Texas, flammable vapor cloud release detonated, ignited, extensively damaged the chemical plant and killed 23 people. Both of those incidents are important because David White, publisher of the magazine, Industrial Fire World, responded to both of those and in fact played a very important role at Pasadena as far as logistics, rounding up the kind of special equipment that was needed to deal with the emergency. Large diameter hose was not so easy to find in those days and was not widely used in industry. David tracked down miles of it, which was badly needed because the blast had sheared off all the fire hydrants at ground level. the emergency water system was pouring out into the streets. On top of that, there's a variety of incidents that not only industrial firefighters might be called upon to deal with, but municipal and volunteer fire departments may be called in on. Train wrecks, chlorine spills, warehouse fires. We have a reactor explosion at a small chemical plant in Florida. Collapse of a high-rack storage structure in Wisconsin. Explosion at a Houston foundry. Dust explosions, more than one. Liquor warehouse fires, magnesium fires, which are particularly bad to deal with because burning magnesium react quite violently when the water is applied. Acid spills, let's see, grounded freighters, the perennial tire fires that are difficult to deal with, and municipal and volunteer firefighters have magazines like Fire Engineering and Firehouse to rely on. And industrial firefighters, what they do is highly specialized, and the scale and scope of what they deal with is so much larger that they needed their own publication, and that was Industrial Fire World.
Well, Anton, let's reflect on that just a little bit. David, you began your career, to talk about that municipal industrial relationship. You began your career as a volunteer in McAllen, and then a paid firefighter in McAllen, and then you were recruited to come to A&M and start the Recruit Fire Training Program. And then how did you go from that into this industrial focus in your career?
Well, I was like so many people. In younger years, I got involved with the McAllen Volunteer Fire Department and was in that position for about 4 or 5 years. And then the Texas A&M University Fire Training School needed somebody to start up this new recruit training program in the state of Texas. And that's what I did my first 2 or 3 years there, is I went out there and they said, and this is the funniest part of it, they said, well, all your visual aids you'll need and all of your handouts and everything, they're in the desk drawers of that file right there. And I went, this ought to be interesting. Opened the drawer up and there was a folder with 3 pages in it. There's page 1, page 2, through page 5. And it's like, oh, well, where's the visual aids? Oh, they're in that one box sitting there. And I says, do we have a classroom? Yeah, we had to make that too. And from there, things just rolled on, and I was working at the university, getting to travel here and there, go to conferences such as FDIC, and Chiefs Conference. And I got to meet people from just gigantic people from the standpoint of their stature, their ability to influence people, because they were out there, were hired by companies to come put out fires. They were worried about spills, working about levees, and it just goes on. If it can relate it to fire, disasters, and spills and leaks and things. And one of the most famous leaks that I got involved in was sort of by accident, because I got called about 6 o'clock in the morning one time, and I grabbed my friend who lived in the apartment complex with us. And I said, what do we got? Well, they got a train drill over in Nacogdoches. We need you to come help us. I said, okay, I can do that. That's what I'm around for. And anyway, we drove the 135 miles to Nacogdoches, and we got there about 2 hours after leaving. Now you have to add up the mileage there, but I'm not going to. And anyway, we got over there, and we got the command post in the middle of the highway, and down a little hill about 1,000 feet away was a train derailment. And train derailments in those days were about 1 a month. And this thing involved 28 cars with propane, LPG. And the railroad says, I need to go down there and shut the engine off. The train engine was sitting at an angle. It was sitting there running, and this was real dark and that night. And we went down close to it, and I had a railroad guy with me. And we got down there, and I said, how do you shut the engine off? He said, see that thing there? Yeah, you pull it. I said, I can do that. We did. And we went back up the hill, and once we got up the hill the second time, we were looking at the derailment, and all of a sudden we saw it starting to getting larger. The fire was now feeding, the tank was failing, and it turned out to be 180 feet from this. And when it went up, boom, you had a fireball that went about 1,500 feet in diameter. We had 14 tanks levied. And I always joke about here is we had one cop, one highway patrolman, and 2 firemen at the command post. And to prove we were there, all of a sudden the next boom, and you heard this. That was a 38,000 gallon LPG tank that just went over our heads. Now let me tell you, after that, I went back to my house in College Station, Texas, and said, you know, I got to figure more about this levee business, because that thing, I think, can kill you. And it can. And there has been many, many firefighters killed because of levees, other reasons, but anything that's burning can't get out of control.
I also remember, David, about 1981, you made the decision that you needed to do something to help industrial people after spending 6 months in the Riyadh refinery on a special assignment. And that's when you left A&M and started your consulting business. And David kept up with his clients with the newsletter. And that's what evolved into Industrial Fire World magazine. And you hosted a conference each year. Once you kicked off the magazine, you also hosted an Industrial Fire World conference to give, for the first time ever, for industrial people to have a place to come and feel safe to share their experiences and learn from each other, because most of them work behind locked gates that they weren't allowed to share much, even between their sister plants and other, within their company, much less with people from other plants. And as you looked at the stories that Anton described in the magazine, how critical being able to share and learn from each other that became. I think about how you come about. A part of our mission in the interview is to help people that are watching not only learn about the exciting things you've covered in the book, but how do you go about printing and publishing something like this in case they're exploring how they might help preserve America's fire service history in a written form. How did you decide about how the book would get published?
Well, I mean, publications, and basically a lot of it starts being revolved around people, around money, and if there's a standard needed, you help them write the standard. And that was being accepted by industry in some cases, but not all cases.
Antonio, you want to add anything to that?
The 2 things that make it most difficult in getting these kind of stories together is, one, companies are particularly guarded about proprietary information, their processes, the things that make their products special and give them a competitive edge. And they're always guarded about anything that might expose that. And second, companies are not exactly anxious to have these kind of events publicized. You don't want to look bad in the press, and that's their immediate fear when we come knocking on the door. But it involves building a relationship with these people so that they understand that this is not an adversarial situation. We're not there to nail anybody to the wall. We just want to print the essential information that some other fire chief at some other plant may find important in dealing with his emergency or her emergency someday. Industrial fire chiefs need to communicate with each other the same way that municipal and volunteer firefighters do, setting up mutual aid associations, things like that. competition is a great thing. It's what the country is based on. But regarding industrial firefighting, we shouldn't have to learn the same lessons over and over again, especially since they usually involve the loss of property and life. And so once is enough, and then that information needs to be shared so that we know how to deal with these situations when they come up again.
Okay, you'll find that when you're going to write an article or to develop a program like this, you got to have cooperation with people and companies. And like Anton kept saying about, you just can't, everybody will not be able to submit information. We will not be able to drag the information out of them. And the thing is, we started going around doing training, doing inspections, being involved in companies. All of a sudden, we were a consultant. We were helping them design the foam system, the airline system. And it just goes on and on. But the thing is, when we started, the gate was always locked. You couldn't get through that gate. You said, especially if you said, well, yeah, but I don't like to take pictures. Oh, man, you might as well just shot yourself in the foot because you just did when you said camera and pictures. But anyway, it got to the point where we could pull up the gate and the security guard knew us and says, go ahead, David, go to the fire station. Joe's over there. And that's the way it got to be. We went to the biggest tank fire in the world, full of gasoline, 8 million gallons. We put that out in 1 hour. We had another fire in a plant that was about 10 acres of fire in this one refinery. And that's the way it went. I mean, the fires were gigantic. Now, are we out of fires? No. Are we going to still have some big fires? Yeah. Now, they may not be refineries, they may be warehouses. There's a big push in Texas and in a few in other parts of the country to build bigger and bigger warehouses. Now, you say big? Well, the old warehouse used to be about 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. These warehouses are 1 mile long. Some of them are only 2 miles, so they're just babies.
When you think about the changes that have taken place in the kinds of fires that are out there, there's also been a lot of change in the tools and the resources that the firefighters have to use in industry. And they're, about the time somebody comes up with something good, somebody figures out there's something wrong with it or that they can make it better. Are there any special stories that you think for historical preservation of the industrial fire world that we might need to point out?
Yeah, we found that when we started our business, we'd go into a refinery, for instance, and they had fire hose on hydrants, and maybe they had 1 fire truck. And they had the biggest nozzles they had would flow about 500 gallons per minute. Then within the first year, most of those plants were now buying fire trucks with 1,000 gallon per minute nozzles. Well, so most people be reading this article or watching this magazine and see this and say 500 gallon, 1,000 gallon, what's next? 1,250, then 2,000 gallon minute. And then a guy named Les Williams invented a nozzle, this a variable nozzle where he could adjust it from 2,000 to 3,000 to 5,000 to 8,000 gallon a minute. And then he developed foam systems where he could educt foam and put it on fire at large quantities. And then as an example, that fire I just mentioned to y'all that we had, we got to respond to because we were called by Les Williams, and he says, get over here, David. Yes, sir. And he'd say, take care of the fire in the back of that tank and get the fire out. I mean, we're looking at tanks bigger than life. And you've got to know what you're doing. And fires today, the fires are getting bigger and bigger and burning up more and more gasoline or crude oil or whatever they're burning up. And it's just getting bigger in the world we live in today. And unfortunately, I'd have to make a statement, and that is 10,000 gallon nozzles is the biggest one we've had in my career. And guess what? Now they're making 15 and 20,000 gallon nozzles, and they're getting bigger than that. And then there's going to be some chemicals that we can put on fire to put them out. The world we live in today is being changed tremendously in firefighting. That fire trucks pump 3,000 gallons a minute. 20 years ago, you just said 3,000 gallon per minute fire truck. Those guys said, "What you been drinking?" And
Anton, you look like you want to make a comment.
Municipal firefighters may deal with a nozzle as big as 500 gallons a minute. Industrial firefighters start out at 2,000 gallons a minute, and that goes all the way up to 14,000 gallons a minute. Back in the 1980s, there were colossal events that happened on a regular basis. That's changed today. A massive industrial fire may be a once-in-a-lifetime event for an industrial firefighter, hopefully. Like David White says, that is good news and that's bad news. It's good news. The good news is obvious. The bad news is that firefighters who used to have a lot of experience dealing with these kind of incidents are more and more dependent on training as their only source of information about how to deal with these things. There's very little actual experience. Again, thank God, but actual experience is not as common as it once was, and to maintain a professional edge requires extensive training, utilizing full-sized training props, and dealing with actual or simulated fires.
Remember you're sharing that one of the fire chiefs in a plant put in an order for like 20 copies of the book, and you contacted him to find out why. And turned out that he was planning to use those with his fire brigade each week to say, if we had one of these events, how would we handle it? And I think that says a lot. Another thing that's interesting about the book, if you explore it, is that, it's one of those books that you can read a chapter and put it down and come back to the next one. You don't have to read it from cover to cover to get the story. And you can almost do a keyword search to find if there's something happening in your neighborhood and you want to know how to handle it. You can find that chapter. But each chapter includes also some comments on key lessons learned. Is there something you'd like to say about that aspect of your book?
I've always prided myself on being a very good feature writer. And firefighters lead exciting lives, and usually quite happy to share those experiences. It's just not the hardest thing in the world to pry this information out of them, their first-hand experience in dealing with these kind of emergencies. If I can't make something exciting out of that, I should have retired a lot earlier than I did. I don't want to boil everything down to an insurance report or a log incident entry. I want to capture that first-hand experience of dealing with these emergencies.
It's been a great opportunity to have a chance to edit a lot of those for Anton and to see, I could almost experience that I was there at the fire when I would read those stories, and I think that is a special talent. We're about to run out of time, and so before we close, David, I'd like to just have you share, you were among the group of men that helped to start the National Fire Heritage Center to preserve America's perishables of the fire service. What would you like to share about your mission in doing that and to encourage people to support that effort as we continue it?
Yes, and that's very important. And I mean, the Heritage Center is not being out there to grab everybody's wonderful things that they've collected over the years. It's to find out if we've got that in the museum now. If we don't, and then we can get it into the museum. And because the museum will outlast most of us are sitting here at the table today. And it's because we got some dedicated people to the mission, which is to protect the materials and slides and movies and things, and it's being selected to be put in the archives, where if a guy wants to look into it to do research, say on levees or boilovers or things like that.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you, David. This is the fourth of a series of interviews, and we'll be covering the Bronze Awards next. But I think it's exciting to have an opportunity to share with our viewers how various writers have been motivated and have approached the task of preserving America's fire service history and their mode of communication. And we hope you will join us for the remaining videos. And it won't be long before we'll be soliciting nominations for the 2022 Ben Franklin Writers Awards nominations. And so be sure and watch for that. You can keep up with us at www.fireheritageusa.org. Thank you.